Welcome to the REROLL Multiple Martial Arts podcast, where we discuss the intersections between martial arts, society, and culture. I'm Elliot,
I'm Danny.
and today we want to talk about romanticism in martial arts, how we perceive, the grand, I guess, illusions, I can say, of the sport, and behind the glitz and glamour is a lot of hard work, and I think there's a lot of probably some misconceptions of the I don't know how hard it is to do it, and I don't want to. I know I sound really like stating the obvious, but being a martial artist, a professional athlete in this in this arena, people often have a day job and then they train. It's not like in baseball or football, where people are well, that's their main thing. I mean, even top 15 guys, chances are a lot of those guys have a day job, in addition to training for, say, a big organization like the UFC. But Danny, how are you feeling? What are your thoughts on how people romanticize MMA?
I think that's well, yeah, I'm glad you clarified it because I was thinking when you talked about right now romanticism in martial arts, and then you were talking about like the professional athletes in martial arts. And to me, that's a new field. And I distinguish them as possibly being overlap and sometimes completely so that and sometimes completely being different. So here's how I think about it, that you can have some martial artists that are professional MMA fighters, but you can have professional MMA fighters that are not martial artists.
Ooh, yes. Okay.
And I'd like to explain that a little bit because I think about, for example, the professional boxer. There are boxers in gyms, but I don't think there's a comparable space as the martial artist. So that I've shared a lot about how I learned about martial arts. And I would say that, like most of us, I learned about martial arts by watching movies. Um, the key film, The Karate Kid, I think came out like in 1984, maybe, and that put a lot of us into the karate classes. And I was one of those kids. And then I met my sensei, and I learned that it was not at all like the movies. That And surprisingly, even at a very young age, I learned that there was this thing like the martial artist, and I knew I didn't have those words. So, but I knew there was something special about someone who dedicated her whole life or his whole life to this practice and to give it to someone else. At that time, there were tournaments, there were competitions, but there was no such thing as like a professional karate practitioner. Even though there were, like in the 70s, tournaments large enough that attracted people to go like to the convention center or the Grand Auditorium in LA, and thousands of people were fans of these uh, martial artists. But the field of professional martial artists, I don't think it ever got to the point that we have now. And now we have this thing called MMA. We have the UFC as one of the leading um, promoting fields. So it's like the professional space for some martial artists, but others no. Others are just great athletes. And I don't, let me be careful. They're not just great athletes. The fact that they're great athletes is amazing. So, but I don't think they are always martial artists in the way that we were trying to come up with a sense of understanding it. Um, but I'd like to return to your question, the romanticism of it. And I have been able to see both the romanticism of people that enter karate, jujitsu, judo, hapkido, aikido, um, because they saw a movie and they wanted to be like the movie star. There's a lot of romanticism there. There's this beautiful sense of greatness in taking your body to a place that most people would never reach. But then there's also the romanticism of the athletes, and I think there's the professional athletes. So that those of us that grew up watching football players and we wanted to be like them, that was romantic. We had no clue of the amount of damage that their bodies took or how much work it took. So I think you're on it, that there's a lot of romanticism within the martial arts field and this thing that we call professional MMA or professional martial artists.
I like that you broke it down between, MMA and martial arts because, you see a lot of, say, professional martial artists. It's a lot of it. They're artists. They're doing it because they're passionate. I mean, of course, a lot of it's passion, but um, you know, they they're at the dojo or the gym, and they're training people, all kinds of people, and it takes a special, passion and a special heart to pursue that, to help other people. They're teaching others, they're helping others, and some of them are competing at the same time. And I don't know, I think of all of their journey, to become a coach, to put their bodies and their personal lives and putting martial arts first, because it has to be that, it has to. I think of all the people that I've met and come across and have seen. It's always martial arts first. I mean, it's like a drug. You see, um, the I don't know, and then coming into MMA, I hear of guys that I meet at the gym. Oh, I want to be a fighter, and I'm thinking that's cool, like that's badass, like do it. What am I to judge? But at the same time, I don't know. Maybe it's like the safe side in me that's always like, but please have a backup plan. Like this is really tough. I mean, you think of all the organizations that are available, and only a few make it to the UFC, which is the biggest, and only a few make it to the top 15. And these are all contracts. There is no security, and putting our bodies through such physical damage, and to an extent mental damage. I really hope that people are thinking really thoroughly when entering this new profession.
Maybe it helps to kind of emphasize what you just said, this new profession, because I was itemizing a distinction between the field of martial arts and martial artists in separation from the market, the entertainment, the professional salary athlete um, that didn't exist into 500 years ago, into even 100 years ago. Um, in fact, I would even argue that the early martial arts that most of these um, present martial artists within MMA use might have been incompatible with the ideals of getting paid to do them. Maybe the exception of Muay Thai, but you can probably maybe correct me on that, because I think, let me just kind of say this way. For example, like the early Shotokan practitioners, Funikoshi, and some of the other um, teachers in Okinawa, they really frowned on the display of it. The early combats or tournaments were hardly, I don't know, it was like a mix. Like it went well, like a friendly challenge, or went really bad. and now we have a rivalry between our schools. Or you guard it and you tell people don't show this unless you need to defend yourself. But we would never say like, hey, you're really good at this. Let me pay you $1,000 to go into a match. And when people fought for money, they usually got kicked out. Um, Something about this thing that says I think it's awkward how the new profession is capitalizing on this tradition that might have not been too excited that it became a profession. But there is one that might work, Muay Thai, because, for example, I think Muay Thai in its early combat tradition was not to be entertaining, but as a field, kind of like boxing, it did become a sport. It did become something that you trained and then you matched up with someone, not to the death, but to see how good your skills were and also to entertain the public and make some money.
Yeah, my understanding of Muay Thai was it was rooted in military and defense, and so there was a lot of stuff that we've in previous conversations have discussed that there's a lot of moves that are no longer used because Muay Thai has become much more sport based, and but and same with Kung Fu, Chinese Kung Fu, is also rooted in military and defense. And later, Kung Fu schools, which which then created tournaments, and but at the same time, it was still super serious. Some people died or got seriously injured, and so now. So yeah, it's just interesting seeing the roots of and perspectives of so many different uh, um, approaches to martial arts because it all leads up to what we understand as MMA currently, and I don't know. Do you think I don't how do you feel about people turning professional or how I don't know. I think there's a lot of romantic, like, okay, in our last conversation, we talked about living vicariously through an athlete because we, as an audience viewer, we want to be that person or we want to live that life. But for me, I live vicariously through some of my favorite fighters because I'm not able to do that. I'm not going to sleep at a gym and just do all that stuff I'm just not committed like that. I'm just gonna say that. How do you see the vicariousness connected to the romanticism?
I think I don't know. I find that there's a potential for them to be very different,
Okay.
so that I am kind of thinking about the ways that I've learned to see martial arts uh, still very romantically. I find myself still someone that is that little kid, 13 years old, that just sees stuff and it's like, wow, that's amazing. And let me watch it again. Let me rewind it. Um, and I find that I want to call it romantic, because it's based in the ideal and not in the real. So that's how I define romantic. That like um it's filled with a lot of like emotion and affinity and attraction to something. However, you want to keep the illusion so that you can keep that beautiful feeling intact, and at the same time um, reject maybe or suppress the reality that counters it. So that in martial arts, I think we want to believe that these people, one, um, are not, they're exceptional, but they are not outside of the realm of what we could do. That's what I want to say. There's a contradiction there. You see them and you know that they have an ability that you don't. But here's something you don't say, or I want to believe we don't say. That person is an extraterrestrial, and no human on this planet except that person can do that. We don't say that. We say something like, if I trained really hard, I could probably do that. And I want to say that's the romance. The romance is that sense of going, I appreciate you, but if I had an opportunity, I could probably be something like you. And when we talk about this idea of living vicariously, uh, especially in the context of MMA or professional boxing, combat sports, maybe even extending it further to like football and basketball. And maybe football and basketball messes up this conversation because I want to stop for a minute and just say a lot of us know that I am not ever going to dunk. Like I am too short. That will never happen. So I just kind of told you that like in my mind, I see the athlete and I go, if I had, I could probably do that. But me physically, I was like, no, my body is too short to ever dunk. LeBron James is someone that dedicates a lot of time to his craft. However, his skill set is complemented by his physical construction that I don't have. But in martial arts, I think a lot of us kind of still pretend like, oh, I'm about the same size, I'm about the same age. Maybe if I had dedicated the past 10 years, I would be at this level. So I think maybe martial arts has more of the living vicariously that is tied to the I could be that person than maybe like the football players or the basketball players. But I find that they're connected. The romance is part of the illusion that we keep for ourselves. But I find that it's maybe that romance is necessary because we cannot hold too much of the reality. Like we were talking about just this question of like, well, do we really want to know how much it takes to get there, or do we want to know how much of a price they're going to pay, afterwards? Muhammad Ali, we saw what happened to his body after the greatest boxer of all time, at least in our generation. And I think a lot of us were really sad. Like, yes, he is the most iconic boxer that, you can go to people who don't even follow boxing and they don't know Muhammad Ali. But when you see pictures of his body and mind paying the price for it, maybe a lot of us were like, oh, that's the price you have to pay to be the best. I don't know.
No, most definitely. I think, yeah, I think a lot of people romanticize. I like it, the ideal versus real, and how romanticism is the illusion of how we see things. And so I think, I don't know, am I being too realistic of like how these people get here? Because I like to see the glitz and glamour and like, wow, they this person made it. They're one of the best. They're strong and healthy in almost peak physical condition, and um and seeing the flaws, for example, say Kamaru Usman, he said in an interview that his knees are like really, really, he has to take care of his knees. And when he goes downstairs backwards because frontwards there's too much pressure. And I'm like, wow, like that's one of the prices to pay to be one of the best, to have so much on our body. And so I don't know. Sometimes I don't want to be that person that says to poo poo on something, or like, to always say, well, on the other hand. But at the same time, I do want to. I don't know. I don't want to shatter the romanticism or shatter the gloss, but I do, because I think it brings out. I mean, it brings out a lot of stuff, of having this the fighters being sustainable, of supporting their own craft. I mean, you hear of you know MMA fighter, Jessie Jess, who you know before her last fight she had like $7 in her bank account and was living out of her car, but trained every day. And even though she had connections to other business deals and stuff like that, it's the reality of it is tough. And I don't know, I don't have an end goal when talking about romanticism. In my mind, I think about how I I I I try to be as big picture as possible, and um I kind of like that the athletes are just like you and me, except they led a different lifestyle. It's like seeing Khabib. It's like, in English, he seems a really humble guy and, very family oriented. But the other hand, he's a super traditionalist, and I don't know if, I would want to hang out with Khabib, even though he's one of the best and I respect him like a lot. Like I like him more than loudmouth athletes. You know what I mean? But um, I don't know. I think part of why I wanted to talk about romanticism today is because I wanted to. I like looking at the real rather than the ideal, and even Mighty Mouse Demetrius Johnson. He's one of the best in the world, but he also he games. He's like one of his other characters. He's an online gamer and he has an audience, and that's part of the way to supplement his income, even as one of the best in the world. And it just, I'm like, wow, man, like the hustle is real. The hustle is really real, and I really wish for the best for the professional athletes in combat sports.
I think you're referencing something that is a larger conversation nationally. And in the way that you mentioned it, like, do we really want to know the real details of the people we admire, or do we want to keep within the ideal romantic fantasy space? And most of us say, well, I like a little bit of both. I want to know that they're normal people like I am. But I also think there's a space where we get troubled when the fantasy is too different from the real. So we have this space in our society that we call the professional athlete. And one of the things we want to believe about the professional athlete is that they are well off. And we know that a lot of them are. But I want to say that if we had to itemize, I don't know, I feel safe saying maybe like 15% are, and then the 85 are not. And I'm only thinking about this as in like the little I know about baseball, the little I know about football, and basketball. And that, like, when you look at all these multimillionaire players, there's also players that make 60 grand on that same team. And that seems really ridiculous. You're like, how can this person make $30 million and then on that same bench, there's someone that's making 60 grand, and has job insecurity. So they don't know if next year they're going to get picked up again on that same team. Well, that's the reality of the whole industry. And equally, it goes like this, even with like our other idols, maybe, or people we admire, such as actors. So that we see some people that, are multimillionaires in a film, and their supporting cast, maybe they got 100 grand. And to me, that's a lot of money, but not if you realize that, like, that might be the only job they get for like 2 years, so that they're trying to break in. in the MMA field, which we're referencing here, is that we see the millions for very few, but everyone else, and MMA is probably higher. I would say maybe 95% of the fighters are struggling economically. And here's where I say that, like, I don't think we want to know that. Um, I remember watching a documentary early on about the UFC, and I don't know which fighter it was. Might have been Coleman. They interview him, and it he's in his house. He's talking about how hard it is, and just the shot feels really. It's almost humbling because he's not just like everyone else, like me in a very humble home. He's not a millionaire, but he also looks vulnerable. There's this moment in that video documentary where he looks vulnerable, and I'm like, yeah, but you were the champion. I just saw you beat up and you had that belt around your waist. And this at the very beginning of the UFC. So if he was making 100 grand, it's a lot for the fight because it's the early time of UFC when like 50 grand is about the number they're throwing around. And as a spectator, I didn't want to see that. So to support your analysis, I don't think we really want to know the real details of it. We want to live vicariously, yes, but we want some romance, some illusion, because I think I want to give ourselves a little bit of credit that we are caring people. So we don't want them to be like gladiators, you know, in an arena where at the end they're gonna die. We don't want that version of entertainment. We want to believe that they get hurt. We see them bleed, but we want to say someone's gonna take care of you, right? You're gonna go see a doctor. But if they say no, they don't take care of me. I don't see a doctor and I lost an eye. I don't know if I can buy a ticket next time to watch that fight.
Yeah, it is. It is tough. Yeah, definitely seeing, Coleman. Um, you know, he's he just had surgery, and I think it was okay. And I think there is more talk um about the future of fighters and retired fighters, and how much of a role, how is moving forward, how is UFC, what is going to change UFC's practices in taking care of fighters, because it's still very new, and I know that, I guess we can talk about that in another conversation. But anyway, yeah, yeah, romanticism. I romanticize. I think part of this goes into like my favorite fighters, and seeing them. I'm like, yeah, these people are so cool. Like, I want to be like them, and I will. Just speaking personally, yeah, there's a bunch of people, and I don't know. Part of it, maybe it's this quarantine where I miss training so much that I'm just like, watching a bunch of fights and following people on their social media, and just like, wow, I want to be like them. And but hey, I don't know. Last night I was eating late night snacks. I'm not trying to, at the time I'm like, I'm gonna give up my road to a six pack for comfort, and hey, it is what it is. But I don't know. I think it's cool that we can, hush out, some of the issues of this conversation, about the professional MMA fighter versus the martial artist of, that was part of the journey for where martial arts and MMA is now, and how the romanticism of the professional athlete is we don't want to know. We don't want to know the struggle a little bit. Part of our favorite. I always link martial arts to music, partially because it's passion, and there's a lot of I don't, there's a facade. You see your favorite musicians, they're on tour, but they still have a day job. They have nice clothes maybe, or they want to look presentable, but those are the few outfits that they have for the public eye. And it's and I like to talk about the reality of certain things, because I don't think it's talked about enough. For we see Ronnie Coleman, but how many other Ronnie Colemans are there out there that we don't know? That struggled and are dealing with a lot of the issues that they have now. And I wish, I'm like, man, like I wish some of these guys would maybe open up a gym or become coaches and things like that. And I think a lot of these people are doing that, and I think it's because the sport has grown so much. With that said, this has been the REROLL Multiple Martial Arts podcast, where we discuss the intersections between martial arts society and culture.